Link up with Eshoma Moimodu and TJ Suadeoye in our Abuja studio for FCT Brief. Good morning, guys. How are you doing this morning? Handing over the conversation to you now.
Good morning, Veronica. It's good to hear from you. Eshoma just told me a quick news before we started that he's now into planting.
Exactly.
So
Go
happy
into
harvest.
Into farming. I think that is the future.
Well, at least the rains bring with it a good
exactly.
tiding. So it's good that you're going into agric.
No matter how small,
no
don't
matter how
active
small.
if it's on a large scale. No matter how small, just go into farming.
Of course.
Exactly. Now, let's give you what we have for you today. Now, this is FCT Brief, and we are live from our Abuja studio. Thanks, everyone, for tuning in. As Nigeria and other developing economies seek sustainable paths to industrialization, revitalizing the steel industry has become a pressing priority. Once hailed as the backbone of industrial development, the steel industry has suffered decades of decline due to policy inconsistencies, poor infrastructure, and underinvestment. But recent efforts signal a renewed commitment to rebuilding the sector.
The federal government, in collaboration with private investors and international partners, is rolling out fresh strategies aimed at reviving production, increasing capacity and enhancing local content. Capacity building, technology upgrades and improved access to raw materials are central to the revitalization agenda. A renewed focus on local production is also expected to reduce dependence on steel imports and boost job creation. While the road to full revitalization is long, industry watchers say the current steps taken by the federal government, if sustained, could restore Nigeria's steel dreams. To provide appropriate context for the discussion, we are being joined by the Minister of Steel Development, Shuaibu Audu. It's good to have you in our studio this morning, Honorable Minister.
Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you for joining us. Well, let's begin with the big picture. President Tinubu's Renewed Hope agenda puts a very strong focus on industrialization, and steel development is right at the heart of it in terms of economic growth and job creation. Can you say we have started seeing real progress in the steel industry, and would you say we're still at the early stages of laying the groundwork? And again, what are those specific milestones and success stories that you can point to and say that we're heading in the right direction?
Well, thank you very much for having me in your studio once again this morning. The Renewed Hope agenda under President Bola Ahmed Tinubu created a standalone Ministry of Steel Development in August 2023 to breathe new life into the steel industry. As you know, steel is the backbone of industrialization, and we have taken tremendous steps and made giant strides over the last 2 years. And it's very important to remember that this is an industry that has pretty much been comatose and non-functional for the last 45 years or 4.5 decades. We've made demonstrable steps in the right direction, and I'll speak to 5 of them. Number 1 is what we have done with Ajaokuta and the National Iron Ore Mining Company. I'll talk to that in 5 sub-parts. Number 1 is we signed a memorandum of understanding with the original equipment manufacturers, OEM, in September 2024, the Transprom export of Russia for the rehabilitation of Ajaokuta and the mining company in Itakpe. But I think it's very important to note that we have also received very, very credible proposals from serious countries that have the capacity to also revitalize Ajaokuta, including the Chinese and others as well. We should also note that China is the biggest steel producer in the world. They produce over 1 billion metric tons of steel annually. So my job is to look at all the options and put the best available option on the table for Mr. President. So I think it's also clear that, the war between Russia and Ukraine may be distracting them and all of those things. So we have to take a decision that is in the best interest of Nigeria. That's the first part. The second part is, having signed the MOU, we also received approval from the Bureau of Public Procurement, BPP, on 20th of May, just over a week ago, for the technical and financial audit. And I think this is a tremendous step in the right direction. If we're going to find suitors for the privatization process, we have to be able to do technical and financial audit to be able to know the state of the plant and what the true valuation is worth and where we can derive the most value for Nigerians. That's number 2. 3, on that first part, is I was at the groundbreaking ceremony of 5 million LNG plants in Ajaokuta on 30th of January 2025, where 5 private companies in conjunction with NNPC did a groundbreaking where they would be bringing foreign direct investment in excess of $500 million. I was there to do the groundbreaking alongside the Minister of Gas, Ekperipo Ekpo, Right Honorable Ekperipo Ekpo, as well as the Governor of Kogi State, the GMD, the former GMD of NNPC, and the former chairman of NNPC, and a lot of dignitaries. That's the third thing that we have done. The fourth thing is we're also having very advanced discussions to sign an MOU with the Ministry of Defense for production of military hardware in Ajaokuta. And the last thing on that first part is the fact that we've put a proposal, I put a proposal on the desk of Mr. President to set up an industrial park in Ajaokuta where land will be designated for an industrial park. Part of that industrial park would also have land that is designated for a gas park. Part of that would also have land that is designated for a free trade zone, as well as a military industrial complex. So these are demonstrable things that we're doing to revitalize Ajaokuta that hasn't happened in the last 40 years. I'll also be in Beijing, China, next week to further the discussion on the privatization process, so that as soon as we conclude the technical and financial audit, we can put the best options in front of the desk of Mr. President for him to make that decision. That's the first thing that we have done. The second thing, I think it's important for me to mention them. The second thing that we have done is also on the revitalization of the Aluminium Smelter Company of Nigeria. You know, my mandate is both the steel and the aluminiums and metal sector. So on the Aluminium Smelter Company of Nigeria, there's been decade-old disputes, ownership dispute between the current owner and the former owner. I took a trip to Ikot-Abasi in Akwa Ibom State in February this year to take a cursory look at the plant myself. The plant is in good order. We need to sort out things that have to do with supply of gas as well as the ownership structure. We're trying to resolve that. I've presented the memo to Mr. President. I've also spoken to the Attorney General. Where we are now is that the Attorney General has asked for a review of the dispute and all the historical issues to be done by both the ICPC and AFCC, just to have a proper position for the federal government before we can take an appropriate position, because there are so many issues around that. So we're trying to resolve that. The third thing that we have also done in terms of achievements is I attended the groundbreaking ceremony of Inner Galaxy Group, who is building a $400 million steel plant in Ewekoro in Ogun State. That steel plant is going to produce 3 million metric tons of steel annually. And it's very important to note that I also, when I was in Lagos and Ogun State at that time period, I also met with the financiers, where I have confidence that the money is actually going to come in. This is not just word of mouth. Okay. They have a track record. These guys, they built the largest lithium plant in Nasarawa State, and they have investments across Nigeria. So there's $400 million that is coming in. We're helping them. I'm helping them through my ministry, as well as in conjunction with the Ministry of Finance, to provide fiscal incentives that will be able to enhance their investments.
The Honourable Minister, I know you have a lot of points
Yes.
you want to enumerate in here. Just because of time. Let's
Yeah.
go back to this Ajaokuta Steel.
Yes.
Governments before yours, ministers before yours have also come to talk about some ambitious plans. I like the plans you have rolled out. But what decisive actions and how far will your leadership be willing to go when you set up this audit of Ajaokuta Steel? Because as at 1979, when it was conceptualized, it was said that in 1994, it was about 80% completed. And if it was about over 80% completed at 1994 and up till now, it's like a carcass because it was given to a concessionaire at a time and they ran the place down and all that. When these audits indict certain individuals, because if we must move forward, we must bring some individuals, some persons, into justice. Will you be willing to go that way? Because if we do not sanction, others will feel we can sabotage what you try to put in place and nothing will happen.
That's a good point. I think we have separated them into two parts. One is a technical and financial audit would be done to actually review the state of the plant in terms of bringing in foreign direct investments and finding a suitor for the privatization process. That is very, very important. Secondly, there's been decade-old issues and problems and frauds that have taken place in Ajaokuta over time. And the National Assembly is reviewing that. Some motions have been passed with respect to, for example, the $496 million that was paid by the last administration. That is being handled separately. But we don't want, as a government, to be distracted by some of the historical things. We want to look forward and try to get Ajaokuta back on track. Because I think this is, and it's very clear that this is the first time that the federal government has shown political will to deal decisively with the problem of Ajaokuta. And I think it's very clear that we're on the right path.
All right, Honourable Minister, we'll still discuss more on this, especially this Ajaokuta Steel Company, because a lot of Nigerians are really interested in what is going on there. But that will be after this short break. Don't go anywhere. We'll still have more for you on the program. Stay with us. We'll be right back. We're glad to have you back. You're still watching TVC Breakfast, and this is FCT Brief. We're still discussing steel development. And we have still with us in the studio the Minister of Steel Development, Shuaibu Audu. Thank you for staying with us on the program. Now, before we went on the break, we were discussing Ajaokuta Steel Company, which has the interest of many Nigerians. You mentioned getting approval from the Bureau of Public Procurement to begin financial audit on this plant. What will you say are your early findings? And can you put a timeline to how soon we see the Ajaokuta Steel Company fully resuscitated and, in motion?
Okay, thank you very much for that question. The approval from the BPP was provided about a week ago. We expect that the contractor that won the bid would be awarded the contract for the technical and financial audit within the next 2 weeks. The whole process should take a maximum of 90 days to complete, let's say 3 months. The technical and financial audit would be concluded. That would help us to determine all the findings, which equipments need to be changed, which can be revamped, and so on and so forth. But we are confident that Ajaokuta can be back on track. And I think it's very clear that Mr. President has shown a desire to revamp all the legacy steel assets and to make Nigeria a G20 economy by making it a $1 trillion economy by 2030.
Okay. Talking about the $1 trillion economy, are there legislative framework your ministry is also pursuing in line with some strategic physical moves to achieve that? Because steel industry is critical if we must get to that point that Mr. President is talking about, the $1 trillion economy. What are those strategic policy framework you're pursuing? And also, are there legislative framework you intend to introduce or to push for to help you drive this objective?
I think that's a very important question. And remember, I talked about 5 giant strides that we've taken, and I mentioned 3. And the 4th one, which talks to the question that you asked, is the legislation that we have brought forward. We had a stakeholders meeting with members of the National Assembly recently in the last month or so, where we want to pass the metallurgical industry bill. It will be a game changer for the steel and metals industry, and to put a regulatory framework around the management of steel. We're importing about $4 billion worth of steel annually. We can put measures in place to reduce and create some import substitution with that. The final point that I also make on the 5th point is other legacy steel assets. I've also done a tour of legacy steel assets like the erstwhile Delta Steel plant. Recently, last week I was there. They're having issues around raw materials, which we're trying to resolve as a government. I'll be going to Katsina steel rolling mill in the next few weeks when I'm back from Beijing to take a cursory look at that and see how we can enhance steel production. I've also visited private steel companies in Lagos and Ogun axis, like I mentioned. So we're doing all those things and putting the measures in place to create a framework. The last thing that I'll say is, in addition to the metallurgical industry bill, we're also putting a metallurgical training institute bill. A couple of weeks ago, I was in Onitsha in Anambra to inaugurate 700 graduates of the boot camp training, where they were empowered, with the artisan skill sets to be able to, be entrepreneurs themselves, make themselves eligible for work and be employed within the steel industry. And this is all moving towards a $1 trillion economy by 2030.
Well, Honorable Minister, as glowing as this achievement you've mentioned are, we're still seeing a lot of import of steel with local production ongoing. That has been a major concern for many Nigerians, especially in terms of industrialization and also the projections they've made for 2030. What are you doing to boost local production and ensure that Nigeria's steelmakers can actually compete both in terms of pricing and also quality?
Okay, first of all, the local steel production, based on the estimates I have, is around 1 to 1.5 million metric tons per annum. What we need is about 4 to 5 million metric tons. So we're producing 20% of what we actually need. So importation is actually critical. We're building bridges. The government is building hundreds of thousands of kilometers of road, the Lagos, Calabar Coastal Highway. All of that requires iron rods and steel, bridges, buildings, all of that. So the importation is required to meet local demand. However, policy measures are being put in place. We look at, the prospects of, providing maybe exemption status or import waiver status for people that want to bring in some of these equipments to be able to meet the local demand. So those are some of the measures that we're putting in place from a fiscal policy perspective. We're working with the Ministry of Finance and Customs to ensure that some duty waivers are in place to a certain extent to be able to ameliorate some of the impact of bringing in those imported steel products into the country, which are required. Part of what the legislation would ensure and put in place is to ensure that there are regulatory standards, and the standard does not drop below a certain point, so that we don't have collapsed buildings, we don't have structures that are not lasting long because there are substandard products that are being used for steel raw materials. So these are why it's very, very critical for a regulatory framework to be put in place to ensure that we're able to implement these critical frameworks.
Still talking about waivers, because you mentioned giving waivers to people that import because of the constructions of roads and all of that. Are there also incentives for and protection for the local producers of steel here to also encourage them to do better and improve the sector?
Yes. Sometimes the local producers of steel have challenges where, perhaps maybe some of their backward integration process is not fully completed and they need some semi-finished product as opposed to finished product. Sometimes the cost of semi-finished products, the duty waiver on semi-finished product is higher than the waivers on finished products. So these are some of the gaps that we need to resolve. If you are charging semi-finished products much higher than finished products, then you are discouraging local production. So these are some of the things that we're looking at together with my technical advisors so that we can put a proposal, an appropriate proposal to the Ministry of Finance and Customs, which is under the Finance Ministry, to be able to resolve and tackle and create an enabling environment for steel production to thrive in Nigeria.
Okay, let's take another look at this Jakarta steel. You said earlier, you talked about the Chinese, you talked about the Russia. It was originally constructed by the Russians.
Yeah.
Now, you also mentioned that the Chinese are the largest producer of steel in the world.
Yes.
Now, what specific edge are these two countries, I don't know others that are bidding for it, these two countries intend to bring on board? And also, what is the present state? Let's just understand the present state of Jakarta, because if we can fix Jakarta steel, people say it will be the game changer for our industrialization.
Yes.
So we have to do everything possible, not just to award the contract, but the best that can help us get to where we intend to get to.
Thank you. The Chinese are renowned for a number of things. One is the Chinese have deep pockets. Two, the Chinese are renowned for speed of execution. Three, the Chinese, in terms of the quality of their output, has significantly improved over the last few decades. Is the fastest growing economy in the world and the second largest economy in the world as well. At this trajectory, in the next decade or 2 decades, they should be the biggest economy in the world. So the Chinese are actually well equipped to be able to handle that. The Russians can also handle it, but my job is to present options to Mr. President. The buck stops at Mr. President's desk. So I just have to do my job and ensure that Mr. President is provided with the best information available to take a decision, which is why I'm going to Beijing. I've already been to Moscow, Russia, and I've presented the findings to Mr. President. At some point, when all the options are on the table, we'll look at we'll look at all the analysis, and together with some competent hands in the federal government, we'll now make a proposal to Mr. President, where he will now provide directive as to where we should head. But I'm confident that we'll resolve the problem.
Now, just quickly tied to that, you said competent hands in the federal government. Are you also thinking of competent hands in the private sector to help advise you in pushing for this idea? Before you present to the president, you bring in a team of private sector industry players to help provide.
Thank you. That's also an important question. We would have transaction advisors. Transaction advisors that will be private sector driven. I suspect that we'll have some investment bankers on the table. We'll have some financial advisors on the table that would be able to advise us as a federal government where the best, direction and how to implement the privatization process. But I think it's very critical that whatever privatization process we put in place will be in line with the ICRC regulations and would be in line with the BPE requirements as well. So all of the boxes will be checked. We're not going to short circuit any process.
All right. right, let's talk about Delta Steel, because a lot of attention is already on Ajaokuta Steel, but there are other important assets as well. You recently visited the Delta Steel plant in Alaja.
Yes, correct.
What steps is the government taking to bring it back to full operation?
So, Alaja has been non-functional since 2020, unfortunately, about 5 years ago. And when I engaged with the management team, the major issue they were having is lack of adequate raw materials. As you know, the Itakpe mine is designated for Ajaokuta. You can't have a big steel plant like Ajaokuta where there is no feedstock. Then there will be challenges. Part of what we need to do is to find a creative solution to address the challenge that Alaja is having. When I went there, the management, after I looked at the proposal of the management, I gave them an 18-month timeline after financial closure to ensure that the steel plant is back on track. They have engaged with some potential investors as well who are willing to bring money, subject to again, the accessibility of raw materials. So we're trying to solution for that. But I'm confident that, we'll be able to, find solutions and get a number of these, steel plants back on stream and back online.
All right, we still have more to discuss, but that'll be right after another short break. Stay with us. We'll be right back.
We don't like to eat better, more nutritious meals, more veggies, but we want it tasty and easy too. Knorr Cubes, that's the secret. Made with real ingredients like chicken, parsley, and garlic, and enriched with iron, so your meals are better for you and more delicious too. That's the cocoa. Let's give it some accolades. Change your world by changing what's on your plate.
It's still FCT brief, and we still have with us in the studio the Minister of Steel Development, Shuaibu Audu. Now,
yeah, we said the steel industry, it's the bedrock of our industrialization.
Right.
Now, is it possible you give us like a time frame? That you just came in August, you said probably in the next 1 year, in the next 18 months, in the next 5 months, that we want to have significant, we probably want to start rolling out our steel, that is getting Ajaokuta steel, getting the premium steel back on stream to begin to meet maybe how many % of our demand?
Okay. First of all, what we've done, let's say in the last 24 months, 22 months to be precise, is to create a clear framework as to how we're going to go about all of these things, right? We have crossed the T's, we have dotted the I's, and we have a clear blueprint. And I'm confident that within the next 18 to 24 months, we would have financial close to a number of these things. I expect that the privatization process for Ajaokuta will be done within that framework. I expect that the financial close for Delta Steel or Premium Steel should be done within that framework. I expect that we should have a clear direction as to the Aluminium Smelter Company of Nigeria within that time. Obviously, there are litigations that are ongoing with the Alscon project, both at the Supreme Court, who just gave a recent judgment in January this year, as well as the London Arbitration Court, where some of the litigations are still ongoing, even very recently. So these are some of the things that we need to tackle. But we're on the right track, and things are headed in the right direction. And I think it's clear for Nigerians to see, if you compare what has happened in the last 45 years compared to what has happened in the last 2 years, I think the difference is extremely clear.
Okay, the sector is also expected to create over 500,000 direct and indirect jobs within the ongoing revitalization process. How can you put a figure to how much jobs have been created so far?
So if you look at the industrial park, for example. The strategy of the industrial park is we're going to have hundreds of steel or steel-related companies, gas companies. We already commissioned, or I did a groundbreaking for 5 mini LNG plants that will create tens of thousands of jobs and bring in $500 million foreign direct investments, like I mentioned. And that groundbreaking was done on 31st of January 2025 this year. We're going to have a lot more of that in the industrial park. If you look at the military industrial complex, the thousands of armed service men and women that would be there to improve the security situation of Nigeria. Once we're able to get the rolling mills back on track, some of these initiatives that we're putting in place in Delta Steel and the likes, we expect both direct and indirect jobs to be well in excess of 500,000 jobs. However, some of the incentives that we're putting in place for the private companies are already creating thousands of jobs for Nigerians. Some of these companies are employing in excess of 10,000 Nigerians. Some of these companies that, once they restart, Alscon, for example, can employ over 25,000 direct and indirect jobs. Delta Steel can employ over 15,000 direct and indirect jobs. So there's massive scale and opportunities in the steel sector. So I think that would be my answer to your question.
You spoke earlier about production of military hardware as well.
Yes.
Do we have the right approval for this? Because I understand that we need some kind of international approvals to get production of military hardware. Do we have those approvals?
No, we don't need international approvals. The approval we need is from Mr. President. I was at the Defense Industry Corporation of Nigeria in Kaduna a couple of months ago, and I saw, what was going on there. We're already producing ammunitions, helmets, vests, bullets, and things like that. But Ajaokuta has the scale to produce those things in massive quantities. So why not use an asset that is already available in Nigeria? Those are the discussions that we're having. And, we have the buy-in of the, Ministry of Defense. We have the buy-in of the Ministry of Steel Development, myself. Mr. President, would hopefully give us his approval in the shortest possible time so we can get started by God's grace.
Okay, the revitalized Ajaokuta steel, or maybe the revitalized premium steel.
Yeah.
Is there a new environmental impact assessment that is going to be put in place to look at the environment and how it will either positively or negatively impact on the environment and ensure that we don't have a situation where host communities say we are not catered, we're not carried along? You're thinking of working towards that also?
Yes, most definitely. Environmental impact assessment is very critical, especially in the 21st century. Part of what the consultants will do once they are given the mandate to start the process of the industrial park is to carry out things like an environmental impact assessment. They would look at the map of Ajaokuta, the aerial map of Ajaokuta, and designate certain industries in certain areas based on its impact on the environment. And we'll work with Ministry of Environment to ensure that that is very well and very much in place. The other thing is that Delta Steel already, has, it has an electric blast furnace. So it already uses green technology. That's one of the things that makes it attractive. So Ajaokuta uses, the proper blast furnace, the old-fashioned blast furnace. Delta Steel or Premium Steel uses electric blast furnace. So these are some of the things that the environmental impact assessment will put in place to ensure that it's in the best interest of the community. And whatever we do is very, very important to note that the community is going to form a very central part of what we do to ensure that they are carried along, to ensure that the community is well looked after, employment opportunities will be created for the community. You know, I'm a Nigerian, but I'm also from Kogi State. So I have to do what is in the best interest of my people, as well as, you know, Kogi State, as well as Nigeria.
How are you adopting modern technologies like compact strip production to enhance efficiency and productivity, potentially creating more jobs in the sector? We have run out of time, so I need you to answer that in 30 seconds.
Yes, we're working with consultants to advise on, you know, the critical measures that needs to be put in place to ensure that these things are done to give us the best value. What we want to do is create the best value to ramp up the industry, to ramp up steel, you know, ministry, and to allow it to contribute meaningfully to the GDP of Nigeria.
All right. Thank you so much for your time. It's a pleasure that we spoke with you this morning. We'll definitely look forward to more coming out from the steel development sector. Thank you so much, Honorable Minister, for your time.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Well, that's our package for today.